The year is 1984, and the question on everybody's lips, who will prevail, the miners or the government?
It is intimidation. It is unlawful assembly. Our duty demands and the national interest requires that we see that violence does not pay and is seen not to pay. Yeah.
Here in Durham, the situation is as bleak as the landscape. Gaping holes where thriving pits once lay under a national consensus. Here lie the graves of a great bastion of British industry. The pits here were once the centre of the community. Family life revolved around these mines. Now only 11,000 miners remain in this part of the country. The truth is that these mines are no longer efficient. Margaret Thatcher is keen to diminish coal production by 4 million tonnes and cut 20,000 jobs by the end of the year to increase efficiency. These archaic collieries can no longer compete with the new super collieries like Selby, which can produce more coal than the whole county of Durham put together with 1/4 of the workforce. Some of these pits are eye-wateringly expensive to run, and closing mines is nothing new, the coal having begun since the Second World War. It makes sense to boost the economy, having faced the worst economic slump in history in the last decade. However, what's the human cost? These aren't just redundancy figures, they are real people with traditional lives who have been at the heart of British industry for centuries. So far, the clash between government and workers has been painful and expensive. 20 million tonnes of coal have remained unmined since the start of the strike, and it's cost the taxpayer £11.5 billion in total. Strikes have become unpredictable, with flying pickets taking place in all parts of the country, and strikers coming to violent blows with police. It's thought that around 150 miners are involved in these strikes. Industry has come to a complete halt, and there are questions about whether Britain has enough energy to maintain itself during this time. But Thatcher stands firm. Only time will tell if the miners can rattle our Iron Lady. Now, here I am with two men at the very heart of this conflict, but on opposing sides. May you please introduce yourselves?
So I'm Mr. Yonto Wilkinson on behalf of Ian McGregor, the ever illustrious man.
And I'm Jim Bistow, the NUM representative for Durham County.
Now this is a question directed at both of you. Do you believe that Mrs. Thatcher has been too harsh in her economic policies, more precisely over the pit closures?
Absolutely. Now, I know that Mrs. Thatcher thinks she knows everything about the economy like, right? But she doesn't understand this, right? Because thing is, right, we understand that the pits aren't making enough coal because we agreed with the Labour government back in the 40s to start cutting it back then. But the 20,000 jobs that Mr. Ian McGregor, right, wants to get rid of, right, that's just too bloody much. I mean, you're doing this, like, but you don't care about the communities. You don't care about, like, the church and the shop and the people who care about these things. You don't think about the legacy, about our fathers' fathers, our children, like, you know. And this is why, right, us and Mr. Scargill, what we're trying to say here is that, look, as long as your party don't stand up for the working man, we will topple you, you posh twat.
Well, Mrs. Thatcher has been wonderfully shrewd in her economic policy. To preserve mines which have been losing money for over 30 years, you might want to know, Mr. Beastle, such as the Durham coalfields, would be ridiculous and disruptive to our economy. The Monopolies and Mergers Commission has found that 75% of our British pits are losing money, and each day these costs are about £1.2 million. Any disgruntled little man who tells you that Mrs. Thatcher has been too harsh simply does not know what he is talking about.
Mr. Wilkinson, so by the end of this year there will be 20,000 redundancies. Can you give a guarantee to Mr. Bistow here that there will be no further redundancies in the future?
Well, our current aim is to eradicate the £8 million imbalance between what our customers want and what we are producing. That, as it has been since last year, has always been my motive.
Bloody liar!
Filth. In the last 4 years, since 1980, demand for energy in this country has dropped by 44 million tonnes, while demand for coal has dropped by only 18 million tonnes. We have got to a point where we are simply producing more than we can sell. I have tried to reason with you people. I have tried to increase exports, what the CGB takes on, but it has failed. In the last year, Mr. Bitso, how many redundancies have there happened? 0 that are not voluntary. So I tell you, why are you in here asking if there are going to be more redundancies when there haven't even been any?
Again, to both of you, do you think the security payout given by the government to newly redundant miners will be sufficient to maintain employment with new jobs for the future?
Do you know what the miners are being paid? £20,000, and somehow they are saying it's not enough to start a business and maintain employment. It is not the sum which our Prime Minister is generously giving them which hampers their employment, but themselves. They really need to show some entrepreneurship and exercise their skills, just like the boys in London. The reason jobs are currently being created there is not because of our biases, but because those men, Mr. Bitso, have right attitudes to work, determination and respect, and will never damage our economy with militancy, you scum.
The payout is a farce. The payout the government have so-called given us is comparable to the dole in the 30s, right? And it's a disgrace on the very name of our welfare state. Not only does the money not cover day-to-day expenses, it doesn't help us create businesses, we can't feed our families, and there are certainly no new jobs. Now, you can say whatever you want, right? Living in your ivory tower, back in London, like it don't matter. But you know what? Where are the new jobs? Show me the new jobs! I don't see any, right? I'll tell you what, right? The reason there aren't no new jobs, why the dole is low, because your Prime Minister don't care about us. She don't care about Scotland. She don't care about Durham. She don't care about Yorkshire, the Midlands or Wales. She don't care about us. And I'll tell you what. Why do you have to make the people who you represent suffer when you could do what you did back in 81 and restrict imports, like coal imports from foreign countries? Why do you let the foreign countries, like, take advantage of us? Yeah, because that's part of your economic policy, isn't it? Now, answer me that.
Mr. Bistow, your leader, Arthur Scargill, did not call for a ballot for the national strike, and many believe this proves that you are not in fact simple disgruntled workers who have democratically chosen to picket, but political agitators labelled by Thatcher as the enemy within. Do you agree?
Typical Tory lies. Right? Absolutely. Mr. Scargill is not a political agitator. He's not an extremist. He is trying to represent the working man. Like, you far well know that Scargill did not call the ballot because he wanted to be undemocratic. It's because of the laws you brought in the early 80s, right? Which then, whatever the result of the ballot would be, you would reject our influence. Scargill is a radical, yes. But an extremist he is not. The whole way he's trying to do is trying to save our communities. Because he knows that if Mrs. Thatcher and Mr. McGregor get their way, we'll be wiped off the map. He was the one who saw the plans, the secret plans that you hid from us, right? To close 70 pits instead of the 20 you claim. Now, answer me this. Are you willing to look at us in the eye and say, you're the extremists, when you are stripping jobs away from our children? It wasn't us who made this political. It wasn't Scargill who made this political. It was Mrs. Thatcher. When she started getting the police to beat up men who have kept this country going for years. I'll tell you what. From me here in Durham, to David Storey back in Gateshead, to James Maguire in the East Midlands, and to every man in this country, working his arse off, day in and day out. These government policies are the kiss of death from Mrs. Thatcher.
I thank you both very much for your valuable contributions to this debate, and from everybody here at BBC Panorama, good night. On this side, we have the National Board representative, speaking on behalf of the chairman, Ian McGregor. Do you think that the security payout by the government to miners will be sufficient? What?
So that's I'm pretending I'm in character. I need to prepare us next time. Mr.
Yonto Wilkinson.
Laugh it out, laugh it out. Kavanaugh raped women, there we go, that'll dampen me.
May you please introduce yourselves?
Well, I am Yonto Wilkinson, here on representing... So I'm Mr. Yonto Wilkinson on behalf of... So I'm Mr. Yonto Wilkinson.
Wait, I've got Eamon's face in the corner.
Get under the table.
We are rolling.
I suck on tobacco for so long, come on.
You don't have to suck on it, it just has to be in your mouth, Eamon.